So before you leave the store, you may want to look on the wall opposite the checkout desk. Is a photo of Michael taken at his first ever book signing. He was here at the Poison Pen, and he's what, 16?
I wish.
In any case, for any of you, were any of you here for that? Karen in the back and me, right. So we used to be at the kindness of strangers was important because our little tiny store on Main Street, there was no room for anybody to sit down. So we did it, do you remember, at a coffee shop called Espressos down the road?
Yeah, I remember everything.
You do?
No, when I was telling Patrick this earlier, is this on?
No.
I don't think so. Here, take mine.
No, is this on?
Yeah.
No, I remember it was the first book signing, first formal book signing I ever did. And my wife was there, and she was in, I was about to say the crowd, she was among 3 people or whatever.
There were actually 22, I counted.
And every time I looked at her, she would go like this. And I thought she was saying I had something in my nose. So Barbara would ask me a question, I'd go like, yeah, it's Barbara. I was trying to cover my nose, and then afterwards she said, I was trying to tell you to project.
It wasn't easy to do your first formal talk.
No, and that was probably 3 or 4 years before I did another after that.
But I actually met Michael in New York. You can correct me on this, but you were there for the Edgar ceremony, and Black Echo was nominated for it and in fact won it, right?
Yeah, but I think we met before that.
Did we?
Yeah, the book, because that was like more than a year. I had 2 books out by the time I won that.
Okay, well, I swear I
I
met
think
you.
we met here
We did.
at the store.
My memory is erasing as I'm getting older.
Well, the book came out in January of 1992, and I didn't win the Edgar until like whatever they do in April of '92.
Right.
So by then I was a veteran guy.
You were so polished and smooth. But the one thing I do remember, and perhaps you do too, is there was a gentleman who came to Michael's first book signing who was actually a veteran of the Vietnam War. And he was pretty sure that Michael was also, because the Black Echo, as you know. So imagine his disappointment when he saw this youngster at the store. Do you remember him?
No.
No.
Yeah, it's funny, we were talking last night, and I was trying to, it's this is our 30th anniversary of the Poison Pen, this month, October, and I haven't been there for the whole time, but I came in '95, and we were talking about it last night, and I first met Mike. I think the book was The Last Coyote that had just come out, and we were just talking about Mike had a shock of red hair, red beard, but it's just been really remarkable to watch, his rise and the arc of his career, and it's a real honor to have him come back here, and I'd like to thank you all for coming. When the dust settles, decades and years forward, his books are going to be read, I believe, and I think you'll all agree with me. So please give him a nice warm. I thought what we do, since Mike's on a tight schedule, he was able to carve out 3 hours for us, which is really amazing bit of juggling, and we really appreciate that. I thought we'd open up to questions here in just a few minutes, and maybe, since we are going to be talking about, his entire career in just a few minutes. There's a lot going on. You've got the Bosch television show we'll be talking about. We've got some exciting news coming forward about previous character. Can I spoil that?
Yeah.
All right. Any of you remember Jack McAvoy?
Yeah.
Oh,
wow.
Well, he's finally making his return, so we'll ask him about that. I thought we'd talk a little bit about The Night Fire, which is the brand new book.
Yeah,
Might as well, since that's what we're here. I'm on point, Heather, if you're watching. This is the new book, and as is the case with the last couple of them, it's featured these 2 characters, Harry Bosch and this terrific female detective, Renee Ballard, together. And I'll ask you to kind of talk about that book a little bit, but to kind of kick it off, the book kind of opens with Harry Bosch's former kind of mentor on the force and got him started. He's passed away and left this murder book for Harry to find. But I wanted to ask you about mentors, just to kind of kick this discussion off a little bit. You know, this character was this guy was a real mentor to Harry. Tell us about some of your mentors. Are there some in your writing career?
What's interesting about, writing, you can be mentored by people you don't even know. Just when you find good writing and you study it and study another writer's evolution over several books. So there was never anybody I would say I could call or email or anything like that and help me out here type of thing. But there is a handful of writers that I certainly learned a lot from, just from reading the books. The closest to a flesh and blood mentor, someone who I actually talked to, was a teacher I had in college named Harry Cruz, and he didn't write crime novels, but he kind of wrote Southern Gothic novels. But he was the first novelist I ever saw in person, and I had him for a class. And then I signed up for a couple others, and it was interesting because he was a kind of a larger than life character. He was a drunkard. He not show up for class more than I didn't show up for class. And his books had this raw power to them. I just loved reading the books and then going to class. And there was a guy who wrote it, and teaching us. So, he also held court. Back when I went to school, the drinking age was 18, so he held court in the bar after classes, and they had a barber's chair in this bar for some unknown reason. And we sat in the barber's chair, and people from class, totally intimidated, would go and have drinks at the bar. But I did that several times. I never once approached him because I thought he might say something to me outside of class. So, but it was just something to see. This is a writer, and again, his lifestyle is nothing like mine turned out to be, but it was just kind of a larger than life character. And then, since we were talking about the Black Echo, many years later, he had a book signing for one of his own books, and my mom went to it in Sarasota, Florida, and said, my son, who was one of your students, just had his first book came out, and the New York Times gave it a great review. And which is a motherly exaggeration. But, and he goes, oh, really? Who was it? And she goes, Michael Connelly. And he goes, never heard of him. So then, I'm sorry, so he wanted to be fast. So then many years later, someone did a documentary on him, and they interviewed him at his writing desk, and he had a wall of books like this behind him. And of course, the egotist that I am, I stopped the video and looked at his books, and there were a bunch of my books. So he may not have heard of me when the first one came out, but he later heard about me.
Right, so Patrick, can I just interrupt a minute and ask Michael, it seemed to me you were at that 1996 conference that we did after Left Coast Crime, by which time you were here, right. And I think I remember you saying that when you left college, you decided to become a reporter and go to Los Angeles in pursuit of your wish to write a novel.
Yeah, I mean, the Los Angeles part came later, but yeah, when I decided to be a writer, partly because of, the first class I had, Harry's Cruise, was just a random English lit class. And then when I decided to be a writer, I took more classes from him. But yeah, just kind of conferring with my parents. It wasn't like I want to be a novelist. It was very specific. I want to be a crime novelist. And my father suggested I go into journalism, instead of English lit, and get a police pass and get into police stations and courtrooms and crime scenes and learn and hopefully that would put me in a position to someday write a book.
Is there anything you had to unlearn from being a journalist in order to become a novelist?
I don't know about unlearning. I mean, all along I was always writing at night and trying to get better. So to me, even though publicly I was a journalist, at night I was a novelist. And so, I mean, they're very different. Obviously you're more creative with novel. You have you have to be right in when you're writing newspaper stories, and that's a whole different set of pressures on you. But yeah, I don't know about, I mean, it's not really unlearning something, but obviously when you write a novel, you have that dimension of being inside someone's head and creating what their thoughts are and what their history is. And when you write a newspaper story, you don't have any of that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about, I mean, I know that a lot of your characters are kind of informed by real police officers and detectives you know. And that's also the case with Renee Ballard, I understand, that she was kind of inspired by one particular person. Is that correct?
Yeah, Renee is definitely, it's weird because like Bosch comes from many different influences, real people, fictional influences, movie, TV. He's really an amalgamation of everything that's ever inspired me. But Renee is a single source inspiration, and it's just a detective, homicide detective, LAPD that I know and have known for a while. And I did what I didn't know about, like she's been helping me with my Bosch books as a homicide detective, and then one time she told me about how early in her career she worked a midnight shift and how it was really interesting because she handled everything from homicide to lost dogs. And I heard that at a time when A, I knew I wanted to try something new, and B, there was something freeing about that because every time I write about Harry Bosch, it's a murder story, and you know that's great because the stakes are the highest in terms of crime. But I like the idea of this woman making her way through Hollywood at night and handling all kinds of weird things and big and small cases. So it was like when she told me that, I said, you know, we got to talk more about this because I want to pursue that in a story.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the books, you know, she's kind of there's a backstory to it that I'm sure a lot of you who've read The Late Show know that she got into some trouble, political trouble. Harassment suit. I always spoil these books. I'm trying not to do that today. But you know, they kind of stick her on the late shift, thinking you know they're just going to kind of put her out to pasture, and it
Right.
proves to be her natural. You know, she blossoms in that environment. Really.
Yeah, I mean that's her journey, is that her finding that this punishment is actually salvation, and she can do what she wants to do and be fulfilled as a detective and a cop and be below the radar of the politics for the most part. In this book, they come back up and she's entwined in all that in the night fire, but she has the greater advantage this time.
And some of you here are wearing. There are a couple of people wearing the shirt.
Yeah,
with
nice.
kind of the Harry Bosch.
My son.
Yeah, his motto. You know, everybody counts, or nobody counts.
Right.
Right.
Speaking of the New York Times book review, there's a terrific review of The Night Fire that ran Sunday. For those of you who get our e-news, I will put in a link to it or quote it so you can read it if you don't subscribe to the New York Times. But they especially liked the energy they thought that had come. You probably have memorized it by now, and I'm sorry I forgot what it says. But they really talked about the juxtaposition of Bosch and Ballard as being terrific.
Yeah, I mean I think it's a good pairing. I mean I think this book and the last book, Dark Sacred Night, it's pretty clear that it's like Harry finding someone who can carry on his mission, and he's kind of passing the baton to her, and that's what, to me, the greater theme or plotting of the last two books.
Well, they're both outsiders. You know, that they both have a healthy distrust of authority. You know, as we read over the long arc of the Bosch series, and they're very well paired together. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, I mentioned just the basic setup of the book is, you know, him getting this murder book that his mentor left for him without spoiling too much.
Well, I mean, it's a pretty complicated book. I think this comes out of television, the television show where we combine books into seasons, and we have, you know, you can't just have every scene with Harry Bosch, so we breathe life into all the other characters, and it's very complicated to map out a season. I think that's influenced my book writing. So this is two characters switching narratives, and 2 or 3 murder cases that come together during the course of the book. But the main thing starts with Harry Bosch getting this, basically a guy who retired 20 years ago when he left LAPD, he stole a murder book. And at first Bosch thinks because it meant something to him and he was working it, and then he found out he wasn't working it, he just stole it, and that becomes a greater mystery why. And he takes it to Ballard, who's always looking for something to do, start working it. But meantime, she has her real job, and there is she's called out on the murder of a homeless person was sleeping in a tent that was set on fire, which is really kind of bizarre because since I wrote this book, that's happened 3 times in LA. And Detective Mitzi Roberts, who's the inspiration for Ballard, is the one working those cases. And so she has this weird thing about she's asking me for an alibi. Because one of them is almost in the same location as what happened in this book, and she vests my book, so she's already read this book and helped me make it better and so forth, and then she gets called out on a case where it's eerily similar, and it's unsolved, so. Anyway, I digress. So a lot's going on, it's all weaving around each other,
And Mickey Holler's in the book too. He has a case that he's working on too.
Right. Yeah, so it's a real tour de force.
Tour de force. We mentioned the TV show, and what's interesting is that for those of you who follow it, they've been blending an interesting approach. They've been blending different books, and I understand the last couple of seasons it's been one kind of older story and then one that's very new.
Right.
How's that worked?
It's really each season starts with me basically deciding how to do it, and I write up like about a 40-page they call it a format, an overview of how I think the season should go. So I've just been doing it, and it didn't have any kind of formal planning that we would do an old and new book. It's just more like what stories we can tell. I've always had some books where I always thought that they would be better filmed. I mean, they would be good books to film, like The Overlook, which is a fast-moving story. In the book, it takes place in 17 hours. We make it, I think, 17 days or something on the TV show. But I wanted to take that and Dark Sacred Night is kind of a continuation of Two Kinds of Truth, and we did Two Kinds of Truth in season 5, so I thought we had to complete it. So that's how it works. I mean, there's no real rhyme or reason. I've just been lucky. I've submitted these formats every season, and the show boss has said, "All right, sounds good." I haven't pushed back.
What about Jack?
Jack, yeah, I mean, next year will be a little different. I'm going to do 2 books. First one's going to be the Jack McAvoy, the reporter book, and that's going to come out in May. And then I'm just going to do a Mickey Haller standalone that'll come out in the fall.
All right.
Wow.
So I'm giving Harry Bosch and Renee a little vacation. There's going to be a Lincoln Lawyer TV show on CBS next September. That coming out.
Is it going to be somebody not Matthew McConaughey?
No, not him. They wanted him, but it's TV, and he still has a budding film career thanks to Lincoln Lawyer. But we turned it down, so there are a lot of. I don't really have anything a lot to do with the show. It's David Kelly who makes really good TV.
Yeah.
And so I kind of put it in his hands and trust him to do a good show. He did say he wanted to get back to the book, the character in the book, and Matthew McConaughey has kind of eclipsed the guy in the book who's half Latino, and that was one thing Kelly said. He said, I want to pursue that with whoever I cast. It'll be interesting. So it'll probably be something very different from McConaughey.
So, one thing I wanted to ask you, I'm not sure if you've ever actually dealt with this. There's not to talk about another writer, but there was a book by Richard Price called The Whites. If anybody read that, and the premise is pretty interesting, where it was a group of cops, both former and current cops, but they all had that one case that eluded them, that they couldn't solve, and they knew, and that kind of they obsessed upon. When you're talking to a lot of your detective friends and things, does that kind of come up where they each have a case that got away from you?
Yeah, no, they all have cases. I mean, no one bats 1,000, in that, and so, many of the little touches that are in the Bosch books come from real detectives, like putting, you know, pictures of victims under the glass tops of their desks. I remember this one guy, when I sat at his desk, I said, "Oh, is that your daughter?" And it was, "No, that was someone who was murdered. And someday I'm going to find out who did it," but he still hasn't. And that guy retires in March, so it'll probably always go unsolved. So they all have those kind of cases, and you know, that's what you want to get into in terms of my fiction. You know, the cost of doing this job, what you get from it, what you got to give, and you know, those are the things that are up front in terms of character themes, you know, in the stories.
I was going to ask a question about Maddie because, you know, she's a big part of the TV and she's growing up. Do you have any plans for her, or is she just going to sort of stay with Harry and?
Well, you know, there's a book world and there's a TV world, and the TV world doesn't, you know, gear too closely to the books in terms of time and evolution of characters. Maybe because I was a former journalist, but I'm pretty strict about the time frames of my books, and I want to explore Maddie getting into adult role and all that stuff, but you know, I know when she was born, and she was born in I forget, 97. So she's born in 97, so she's just too young to she has to have experience and know stuff to really carry a book. So that's why I came up with Renee, because it dawned on me, I can't wait around for Maddie to be and if I'm still writing in 5 or 6 years, then I'll probably look at what's Maddie doing now, and that could be a great character. I mean, it's definitely set up that I can pursue stuff with her.
Well, yeah, because in the TV show she's working, you know, in the cop shop and, you know, thinking about being one. So, but I thought that was TV, but it did occur to me that in the books eventually she'll be old enough to have some kind of adult role of her own.
Yeah. I mean, they're about the same in the show and in the. She's a little bit older in the books, but yeah, still too young.
How does all this go over with your daughter Callie? Is she cool with it, or?
She religiously doesn't read my books. She's only read a few of the books. She knows what's going on, and she actually works on Bosch. She just graduated from film school, so she Hollywood nepotism. I got her a job. So she actually knows this actress playing a character inspired by herself, so it's a little weird. But she's been okay with it.
Because we both know Alifair Burke, you know, James Lee Burke's daughter, and you know, the character in the book is somewhat based upon her in real life. So that's pretty funny. Oh, Dad.
No, a lot of the dialogue that comes out of Maddie's mouth I've heard before. I should say a lot of text that Maddie gets.
Now, some of you probably listened to Mike's podcast, the Murder Book, and can you talk about that a little bit, about how you kind of got interested in doing that?
It was kind of like a whim type thing. I listen to podcasts, and there's 3 detectives that help me with my books. This little cadre I have that I meet quite a bit, and they all, and I have breakfast with them and so forth, and they were all talking about prepping for this trial that was coming up on a 30-year-old case, and over the 30 years, the 3 detectives have all carried the case at different times. So it was meaningful to all of them, and you know, so I asked more about it, and I just thought it was a good true story rather than take it and try to fictionalize it. I thought maybe I'll tell it, you know, in a podcast and have these detectives' voices, and then if you're interested in my books or like my books, the podcast would be interesting, but it would also kind of show you how I research. And so if you listen to that podcast and you read this book, you're going to see big echoes of stuff that questions I ask in a podcast. You're going to see how it becomes fictionalized in this book. So,
What happened to the documentary that you made about this musician, right?
yeah.
Is it, I know it was done, but where can people watch it?
That's on Amazon now. It came out about 5 years ago, and it had a run and did pretty well and got good reviews, and now you can watch it free on Amazon.
What's the name?
took off. I can't.
It was a big personal project for Mike, is the reason I mentioned it, and there was fundraising involved, right?
Yeah, it's called Sound of Redemption.
So another thing that when you're waiting for Bosch to come back up, you can watch that and listen to the podcast.
Yeah, I can weigh in on this a little bit too. Frank Morgan, the jazz musician who spent time in San Quentin, and am I getting this right? There was a jazz band. You know, there were a lot of jazz musicians who ended up in San Quentin for mostly narcotic offenses, and I mean some really great ones too. Art Pepper, a lot of real notables, and including Frank Morgan, who wrote the Harry's theme. Can you talk about that a little bit? I've seen the film and it's really wonderful.
But it's just that when I was putting Bosch together, when this store was just opening, probably, you know, I wanted to have a musical identity, and so I chose jazz because it has that loner thing to it, and so I was trying to go off the beaten path, and my wife actually found a story about the return of Frank Morgan. He spent 25 years in and out of prisons, and it was his second album, and his first album came out 27 years before. And it was about how good this album was. So, and then lo and behold, he was playing in LA that week, so I went and watched him at a club two out of the 3 nights he was there. And so he has this one song called Lullaby, which I always just equated with Harry. And over the years, I got to know him, and I did a few things with him and so forth. So that was why I did the documentary after he passed away. But he's basically a virtuoso saxophone player and a virtuoso con man. And so the conning was to get money for drugs. He was a drug addict. But, you know, as he proudly tells me in the documentary, or I relate in the documentary, he stole over $1 million, and this is in the early 60s on a check kiting scheme, and it all went to drugs for him and his crew. But anyway, but in the meantime, the guy made some wonderful music that I still listen to.
And one of the things, if you see the documentary, is that they take a bunch of contemporary musicians into San Quentin and put on a concert, playing Frank's music. And for me anyway, the most moving thing is watching the convicts there respond to this music. And it's very, very emotional.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Over the years, we've heard a lot of writers talk to us about music as part of their life, part of their creative process, but consistently, you and Ian Rankin have been the two that I think we've talked to the most about how music actually influences or is part of your writing.
Well, I mean, for some characters it really did, but then you look at Renee Ballard. I've written now 3 books that have her in it, and I haven't given her a musical identity, and it's just like this. I don't feel it yet. When I do, I'll put it in there.
Right. So should we open it up for questions?
Yeah.
Right. Now, actually, Patrick, why don't I, at this moment, wave goodbye to our TV audience, and you could turn off the camera. For anyone who, we did just video this, we are now saying bye. And you can see it on Facebook Live, or you can see it on a YouTube channel.